I'm going to talk about how to divide whole numbers and fractions, and how to divide fractions by whole numbers. And we're going to do it numerically today. It's actually very easy. The mechanics of it is very easy. But after I show you the mechanics, I'm going to do a couple of story problems. It's very important when you do a story problem to understand which number goes first. Okay? So I have 8 divided by 1/2 here. Now, this is how you do... basically what you do is when you divide two fractions, and we can turn this into a fraction. Okay, so now I have two fractions. I'm going to divide them. I have 8 over 1 divided by 1/2. When you divide two fractions, what you do is you just find you flip the second number over, and then you multiply them together. Now here's a rhyme that will help students to remember that. When dividing fractions, don't ask why, flip the second number and multiply. So what I did is I changed this 1 over 2 to 2 over 1. I flipped it. This is called a reciprocal, but you can just think of it as flipping the number over, flipping the fraction over, and then I multiply. These two are the same problem, but when we divide, we just turn it into a multiplication problem like this. So now I can multiply 8 times 2, and I get 16. 1 times 1 is 1, and that is 16. 8 divided by 1/2 is 16. Now I'm going to do this one, which is a fraction divided by a whole number. Once again, I'm going to turn them both into fractions. When dividing fractions, don't ask why, flip the second number and multiply. 1 times 1 is 1, 4 times 12 is 48. And 1 over 48 is my answer here. Notice it's very important that you know which number you flip over. It's always going to be the second one. You don't have to do anything to the first one. In fact, I didn't even need to make this into an 8 over 1. I could have just made this 8 and then changed the 2 over 1 to a 2. I would have had 8 times 2 is 16. And definitely don't flip over this first fraction. Only the second number. Okay? So that's how you do that. I'm going to go over a couple of story problems. Annalise cuts half a yard of rope into 8 equal parts. What's the length of each part? Now this is either going to be 1/2 divided by 8 or 8 divided by 1/2. Okay? The first number is going to be the thing that you're cutting into pieces. Always. That's how you know which number goes first. You're dividing that into pieces. Okay? So Annalise cuts half a yard of rope. Well, I think this tells me very clearly what I'm cutting into pieces. Annalise cuts half a yard of rope. So that's going to be my first number, 1/2. And we're cutting it into 8 parts. So it's not this one, it's this one. Okay, now I can do my problem. So I'm going to change the 8 into 8 over 1. So I have 1/2 divided by 8 over 1. Once again, when dividing fractions, don't ask why, flip the second number and multiply. 1 times 1 is 1, 2 times 8 is 16. So that is 1/16 of a yard. Now imagine I did this way. If I did this, I would have gotten 16 as my answer instead of 1/16. Okay? Now let's think about whether that would make sense. If I started out with 1/2 of a yard of rope and I cut it into smaller pieces, could I possibly end up with 16 yards when I only had half a yard to begin with? No, I couldn't. That's how you check to see if your answer makes sense. Okay? This makes sense. This is less than half of a yard. I cut this into a bunch of pieces, and each piece is 1/16 of a yard. Okay. Now this one says, the dragon costume for the New Year's celebration is 9 yards long. If Brittany sews a button on each 1/6 of a yard section, how many buttons will she sew? So what am I cutting apart here? Let's look at the two different ways I can arrange these numbers. 9 divided by 1/6 or 1/6 divided by 9. Now, I have a dragon costume that is 9 yards long, and we're sewing buttons, one button every 1/6 of a yard. Let's draw a picture of that just to see what we're cutting up. So this is 9 yards, and cut this up into yards. And then each yard is cut into sixths. So then there's 6 in buttons on each yard, because this is cut, each yard is cut up into sixths. I'm not actually literally cutting it up, I'm just putting a button on every 1/6 of a yard, but math-wise you can consider it cutting it up into pieces. So from this picture I can tell that I'm cutting this 9 yards into pieces. So it's not this one, it's this one, okay? So I don't have to actually change this 9, I'm going to leave it as is, and I'm just going to flip the second number and multiply. So when dividing fractions, don't ask why, flip the second number and multiply. So I can change the 6 over 1 to 6, and my answer is 54 buttons. Okay? Now if I did it the other way, I would have gotten 1/54th of a button. I don't even know where you would find 1/54th of a button. What fabric store would sell that? So clearly, that is not my answer. It is 54 buttons.